Hi, I'm Ellen from EVPL Oakland. Are you ready for another chapter book story time? On this week's edition of the Variety Pack, I've got an action and adventure story that I think you're going to like. It's called Shinji Takahashi and the Mark of the 𝑘𝑎ℎ𝑎𝑠ℎ𝑖 by Julie Kagawa. It's part of a series. This is number 1. The series is called the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, or SEA. The second book in the series just came out, and it's called Shinji Takahashi, Into the Heart of the Storm. I read this one first, and I thought, well, maybe I better get to the first book and read that one to you instead, because then you'll get a little bit more of an idea of what's going on in the series. So, let's take a look. Shinji Takahashi and the Mark of the 𝑘𝑎ℎ𝑎𝑠ℎ𝑖. We start off with a prologue. Flames roared and snapped in the night. The wail of sirens filled the air, lights flashing red, blue, and white as crowds and vehicles surrounded the inferno. Even the rain that fell from the sky could not snuff out the howling flames. The simple suburban home with the quaint picket fence blazed like a fireball against the darkness, drawing the eyes of everyone in the neighborhood. Police officers held back the crowds as firefighters sprayed jets of water onto the roof of the burning house, sending huge billows of smoke into the air. Unseen and unnoticed by everyone, a large black spider crawled through the window of the doomed house, scuttling away through the wet grass. Firefighters raced back and forth, their booted feet pounding the mud, but the spider deftly avoided being crushed. It paused, hiding beneath an overturned tricycle as the front door burst open and a firefighter stumbled out of the burning house. Coughing, shoulders hunched, the man held a wrapped bundle close to his chest, shielding it with his body as he staggered into the open. As the spider watched, crouched below the handlebars, 2 more firefighters hurried forward to help. The first man lowered his arms, revealing the dirty, tear-streaked face of a small boy, dark hair falling into his eyes. One of the firefighters drew a sharp breath. "Is he the only one?" The man's voice was low, barely audible over the roar of the flames and the jerky, gasping sobs of the child. "His parents?" The firefighter holding the boy closed his eyes and shook his head. "They didn't make it." The other's shoulders slumped. "Poor kid. Well, let's get him to the EMTs. Hopefully he has relatives who can take him in." They walked away, the boy's sobs fading into the night. The spider crawled out from beneath the tricycle and scuttled off toward the crowd of people watching the firefighters battle the flames. It scurried around feet and crawled over shoes until it reached the edge of the crowd, where a lone figure watched in the shadows. The figure held a black umbrella, its face hidden in the hood of its raincoat as it gazed at the burning house and the firefighters still rushing around it. The spider crawled onto the figure's shoe, then scuttled up its leg, vanishing beneath the hem of its coat. A few seconds later, it crawled out from beneath the collar and perched on the slender neck. Mandible waving, it made a faint chittering sound that could not be heard by the normal human ear. Beneath the hood, the figure's blood-red lips curved up into a smile. "Excellent," it whispered. "The piece has been found. The game has been set into motion." Turning from the burning house, it began to walk into the dark, though its final words hung in the air. "I will see you soon, Shinji Takahashi." Chapter 1. Our story then jumps forward several years as Shinji Takahashi and his Aunt Yui are slowly floating down the river in Africa on a way to the quiet village of Abenge. Aunt Yui and Shinji are from Miami, Florida, where she owns a shop called Lost River Outfitters, where they sell goods made by local artisans from remote villages around the world. But every year, after tourist season is over, they have to travel and go find things that they can sell in the shop. At first, Shinji really liked this way of life. He loved traveling and going to exotic villages and just exploring the world. But now he's 13, and he would kind of like to live a normal life. Instead of being homeschooled, he'd like to go to a regular school and play sports. He'd like to go to basketball camp in the summer and go swimming at the local pool. But he can't do that now. So as the story opens, he and Aunt Yui are kind of discussing this kind of life that Shinji would like to have, and Shinji's kind of cranky. Aunt Yui turned to him, a faint, exasperated smile on her face. "Shinji, my dear, I have an idea," she announced. "Instead of following me around sighing the world is boring and unfair, why don't you try to find something yourself?" Shinji frowned. "What?" "This will be like one of your online treasure hunts, right?" Aunt Yui reached into her knapsack, withdrew a roll of bills, and handed it to him. As Shinji stared at it in confusion, she raised her hand toward the sky. "I am sending you on a quest, young Shinji," she announced in a grand voice, "to find a treasure worthy of a great warrior like yourself. Search the marketplace, speak to the vendors, and if you find something truly unique and special, you may buy it for your room back in Miami. Find yourself a toy to occupy your time, is basically what I'm saying." "I don't play with toys anymore," Shinji said, rolling his eyes. "Then just find something that interests you." "Wait, really?" Shinji glanced down at the wad of money in his hand, then back to Yui. "You're just going to let me buy whatever? How will I know if it's worth the money or not?" "Ah, that's the mystery now, isn't it?" Yui's smile was suspiciously smug. "You find out by asking. Talk to the vendors. See what makes something extraordinary. You'll know in your heart when you find that special item that what you're looking at is worth it. So, young adventurer," her smile grew wider, "will you accept this quest? The fate of the world may depend on it." Shinji rolled his eyes. "I know what you're doing," he warned his aunt. "Don't think I don't know. You're not fooling anyone." "Oh? Well, if you don't think you can shop on your own, I'll just take the money back." Nope." Shinji whisked the roll of cash out of reach. "I didn't say that," he told her, still holding the wad at arm's length. "I'm just not fooled by this whole quest thing. This isn't a quest, it's an errand, but I'll do it under protest." Yui smiled down at him. "Well, you're too smart for me, I suppose. Go on then, smarty pants." She waved a hand at the marketplace behind him. "Go, find a lightning sword. Oh, and try not to talk back to anyone this time. Important rule of any negotiation, keep the snark to a minimum. Can you do that for me?" "I'll try," Shinji muttered. Slipping the roll of cash deep into a front pocket, he turned and melted into the crowds of a Bengay market. For a while, he just wandered, weaving through people and around stalls, not really knowing what he was looking for. He stopped at a couple of booths selling purses and woven blankets, but quickly got bored with that and moved on. A table selling various gems and jewelry looked interesting, but Shinji did not want to stare at rings and necklaces all afternoon. He wandered past the main stretch of the market, not really looking at anything until he came to the edges of the marketplace. Something squeaked behind him. He turned to see an ancient-looking wooden sign creaking as it swung over a doorway. The cracked, peeling wood was painted a dingy yellow and read, "Look out, traders," in blocky black letters. Curious, he edged forward and peered through one of the grimy windows. "Look out is right," Shinji thought. He couldn't see much, just a bunch of shelves that were packed with stuff. But maybe this little shop would have something of interest, the toy or treasure Aunt Yui wanted him to find. Pushing aside a curtain of beads, he stepped into the shop. It was cool and dim on the other side of the doorway, a relief from the blazing sun outside. A tiny electric fan hummed on the counter as he stepped into the shop, blowing the smell of incense into his face. As he blinked, waiting for his eyes to adjust, a thin, reedy voice came to him from somewhere in the room's interior. "Welcome, young man. Do feel free to browse, but try not to touch anything. Wouldn't want your grubby little hands to break something valuable. Everything here is very old." "Including you?" Shinji thought as his eyes finally adjusted. The pinched face of an old woman with light brown skin and a crown of gray hair stared at him from behind the counter, lips pursed and eyes narrowed in suspicion. Around her, the corner and shelves of the tiny shop were covered in stuff. Blankets and baskets, jewelry and figurines, clay pots, seashells, furniture, rusty tools, and a ton of what looked like ancient junk scattered everywhere. The shopkeeper still glared at Shinji, her beady eyes sharp with distrust, as if he would slip something into his pocket or knock over an ugly but very expensive vase. "Can I help you find anything?" she went on, half rising off her stool to peer at him. "Are you lost? The candy and ice cream store is on the other side of the market. Also, do take note that you're on camera." She pointed to a cam in a dusty corner of the room. Shinji very seriously doubted it still worked. "So, I'm watching you." "Geez, calm down, Grandma. I'm not a thief. I'm just looking around," Shinji said. "Can I do that? I won't break anything." The old woman scrutinized him a few moments. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt, though I've said those words before and regretted it." She pointed at him with a very shiny red fingernail. "Don't make me regret it, young man." Shinji offered his best innocent get-off-the-hook smile. "I won't." The shopkeeper sat down again with a huff. Snatching a magazine from the counter, she flipped it open and started reading, though she still eyed him over the pages. Shinji turned and quickly slipped between a couple of shelf-lined aisles, out of her immediate sight. For a few minutes he wandered, gazing at the merchandise crammed onto the shelves. Some of it was stuff he'd seen before, and some of it was absolute junk. But there were also conch shells and uncut gems and figurines carved of bone. There were alligator skulls, antelope horns, and necklaces made of shark teeth. There were carvings and trinkets and things he didn't even have a name for. With every aisle Shinji turned down, he found more wonders and junk, but nothing really stood out as the thing he was looking for. "Shinji." "What?" Frowning, Shinji stopped, listening. He was almost sure someone had whispered his name, but it hadn't been Aunt Yui's voice, and she was the only one who would call to him. Gazing down a dusty aisle in the corner, he blinked as he saw two tiny green lights, like glowing eyes, staring out of the shadows at him. Curious, he walked toward them. The lights disappeared, but he kept walking until he found himself staring at a shelf full of carved animals. Crouching down, he carefully moved wooden elephants and hippos aside, then reached all the way to the back. Something black and shiny crawled out from beneath the ledge. A massive spider banded in yellow and red. With a silent curse, Shinji yanked his hand back as the huge arachnid scuttled up the shelf and vanished over the top in a flash of chitin and jointed legs. "Jeez," Shinji gave an exaggerated shudder. "Time to clean up shop, Grandma. Ugh." Finding one of those shark head grabber toys, he poked it under the shelf to make sure no webs or spiders were still lurking out of sight, then carefully reached back again. His fingers brushed against something that didn't feel elephant or hippo-ish. He grasped the object and drew it into the light. As he turned it over, his heart gave an excited little lurch. For a second, he thought it might be a dragon. Like the creatures in his online games, it had a long serpentine body and a slender neck reared back into an S shape. A pair of massive wings framed its snake-like form, but these were made of feathers instead of the normal bat-like membranes. After a moment, he realized it wasn't a dragon, but a huge winged serpent, a crown of feathers raised around its neck like a cobra's hood. Its eyes, tiny green gems, glittered as he stared at the statue. "Cool," Shinji whispered. "𝑘𝑎ℎ𝑎𝑡𝑙," said a voice behind him. Shinji jumped, managing not to drop the figurine as he turned around. The shopkeeper stood a few paces away, her mouth pulled into a grim line. How had she snuck up behind him? A lifetime of travel made Shinji hypervigilant about pickpockets, thieves, and those with not-so-nice intentions. He usually was more alert than that. The old woman wasn't looking at him, however, but at the figurine he held in his hand. "That," she said in a somber voice, "is the 𝑘𝑎ℎ𝑎𝑡𝑙, the feathered serpent of myth and legend. Very old, very valuable." Her sharp black eyes slid up to his face. "Far too valuable for you, I'm afraid. If you would kindly put it back on the shelf before you drop it." Shinji bristled. "I'm not going to break it," he protested. The wood was suddenly warm in his hands, drawing his attention to the statue again. "It's pretty awesome, actually," he admitted, aware that the old woman had stepped closer, as if to snatch it up should it tumble from his fingers. The serpent's gem-green eyes glittered as he held the statue up, entrancing him. Suddenly, he had to have it. How much is it? Too expensive for you, boy. Shinji frowned at her. I have money. Not enough. The shopkeeper's voice was unyielding. She reached out and, in a deftly quick move, plucked the figurine from his hands. Instantly, Shinji felt a sharp, almost painful stab of loss. His heart clenched and his insides went hollow as he watched the statue being taken away. The old woman shook her head, then lifted her arm to place the figurine on an even higher shelf. Suddenly, she paused. As she gazed down at the statue, her brow furrowed, and she tilted her head as if she could hear something. Shinji could not. Blinking, she gazed at Shinji, then back to the statue, and then at Shinji again. Interesting. Straightening, the old woman turned her head to stare at him fully, her expression caught between amusement and doubt. Very interesting. Well, well, that changes things, doesn't it? Shinji frowned, not exactly liking the look the shopkeeper was turning on him now. What does? The old woman regarded him with an eerie little smile. It appears the idol wants you, boy. Huh? Taken aback, he stared at her, not entirely sure he'd heard it right. The statue, wants me? The shopkeeper nodded. Like it wants to eat me or something? You do realize it's a statue, right? She just gave a faint chuckle and another shake of her head before putting the statue into his hands. One cannot fight destiny, boy. Her voice was soft, her eyes intense as they met his own. Even if one does not ask for it, you must be special in some way. The idol calls for you, and you must answer its call. I cannot stand in the way of fate. Therefore, it is yours. Special in some way? But then he shook his head. Ridiculous. Really? Just like that? Yes, the shopkeeper smiled, showing off a set of perfectly straight teeth. For $200. $200? Shinji gaped at her. Aunt Yui hadn't given him that much cash. You said the idol was calling to me, that it was destiny. Yes, the shopkeeper's smile didn't waver. And it is destiny that you give me $200 for a unique, very valuable 𝑐𝑜𝑎𝑡�l figurine that you found in my shop. It is the only one of its kind, you know. I have to make a living, too. Shinji scowled. Suddenly, all that talk of destiny and fate seemed like a scam. But he did want the 𝑐𝑜𝑎𝑡�l. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out the wad of cash and held it up in front of him. I'll give you 87, he countered. Done. The shopkeeper snatched the money from his fingers with a toothy grin. Lovely doing business with you, young man, she almost cackled. Do you want me to wrap that up for you? Shinji was about to say no, then thought better of it. Walking around the marketplace with a very expensive idol in his hands might be a bad idea. He didn't want to be accused of stealing. Yes, please, he said. As Shinji followed the old woman back toward the counter, the door of the shop opened with a creak. Trailing a waft of warm, dusty air, 2 men entered. One was tall and slim, but powerful looking, with dark skin and close-cropped hair. The other was pale and blonde and built like a tank. They wore expensive-looking suits and dark glasses and looked like they should be guarding an important celebrity, not browsing novelty shops in a Bengay. The shopkeeper took her time wrapping and bundling the idol, handling it like it was made of gold instead of dark wood. A few minutes later, clutching a plastic bag that said, "Thank you," above a yellow smiley face, Shinji left Lookout Traders and stepped back into the blazing sun of a bendy market. That was dumb. I probably did get conned back there. All that talk of fate and destiny. Jeez. He shook his head, disgusted with himself. One of a kind. Yeah, right. This thing probably has a Made in China stamp on the bottom or something. Hey, kid. Shinji turned. The 2 men from the shop were back, and they were walking toward him with twin glares behind their sunglasses. Wariness rose up inside Shinji. Had they followed him? And why were they stalking him like a pair of cops closing in on a shoplifter? Shinji tensed. His first thought was to run, to lose them in the busy Ambege marketplace. He knew the streets and twisty corners of the market pretty well, and he was fast and small. If he took off now, those two goons in suits wouldn't be able to keep up. But then, defiance flickered. Why should he run? He hadn't done anything wrong. He'd bought this statue fair and square and had a receipt to prove it. Planting his feet, Shinji stayed where he was as the two men strode up, their large frames casting a shadow over him. Yeah? Raising his chin, he met their dour glares with a smirk. What do you want? You bought something in that shop, the first man said, and it sounded like an accusation. What was it? A statue. What kind of statue? Why do you want to know? The second man took off his dark glasses and stared at Shinji. He had cold blue eyes that looked both menacing and annoyed, as if he couldn't believe he had to put up with this. Answer the question, he said flatly. What did you buy? Shinji bristled and held the big bag tighter. Sorry, but I don't see how that's any of your business, he told the first man, whose jaw tightened. Unless you guys are the statue police, in which case I'm going to need to see some identification. Don't be a cheeky brat. The first man squared his shoulders. I asked you a question, and you'd better answer me if you know what's good for you. Shinji stood his ground. This was a busy corner, and he'd bought this statue fairly. If these two tried anything, there would be tons of witnesses to see it. So is this a shakedown? He challenged. Are you trying to threaten me into giving away the statue that I bought with my own money? Last I heard of, that was kind of illegal. Oh, for God's sake, the second man sounded even more exasperated than he looked. We all know where this is going. Here! He raised his hand, one $20 bill pinned between two fingers, and pointed at Shinji. Take it, give us the statue, and get out of here. Shinji laughed. $20? Are you kidding? You think that's what I paid for this? The man's blue eyes went even colder, but he silently added another 20 bill in his hand. Shinji snorted. Nope, still not even close. The man lowered his arm, his piercing gaze boring into Shinji like he was a particularly disgusting insect. Very well, he said in an overly reasonable voice. What do you want for it? Maybe I don't want to sell it, Shinji announced, feeling stubborn and rebellious under that disdainful stare. Maybe it's become precious to me. The other man gave a snort of his own, rolling his eyes. Don't be ridiculous, he growled. Take the money. Go buy a bike or a skateboard or whatever kids do with their time these days and give us the nice, boring statue. It's worth nothing to the likes of you. The likes of me? Like he was some unworthy, unimportant kid? Shinji set his jaw. That might be true, but he wasn't going to let a couple of snooty, hotshot jerks tell him so. And he really didn't take well to being bullied. You know what? Shinji said and took a few steps back. I've made up my mind. This statue is not for sale. I'm not giving it to you for any price. The first man swelled up a bit like an angry bull, nostrils flaring and eyes going wide, but the blond man simply held up a hand, stopping him. That is a mistake, he told Shinji in that cold, brittle voice. Think carefully about your next decision, boy. The smart move would be to take the money we are offering. The idol is of great interest to some very important people. You do not want us as your enemies. Yeah, you know what? I think I'll take my chances. Shinji backed up another pace toward the crowds and the bustle of the market and gave the two men a cheerful smile. Nice talking to you. You guys have a good day. He turned and suddenly found his path was blocked by a third man in a suit who stared down at him menacingly. This one had jowls and pockmarked tan skin. A scar ran all the way from his hairline, down his cheek, and into his dark beard. The first man gave a cold chuckle as all three of them took a step forward, boxing Shinji in. What makes you think you could just walk away? The third man asked in a soft, terrifying voice. Shinji shrank back, tightening his hold on the bag even further. There are people watching, he told the men. If you do anything to me, everyone in the market will see it. The blond man chuckled. Who do you think they are going to believe? He asked. The scruffy kid? of the street or 3 responsible-looking adults. If I pay someone $100 to say you're a filthy thief who stole that statue from a shop, what do you think will happen? The men stepped closer, surrounding him and cutting off any escape. Shinji clutched the bag to his chest, breathing hard as they closed in. His mind spun as the blond man leaned down, filling his vision. Last chance, brat, he warned, his breath hot in Shinji's face. Give us the statue now, or things are going to get really unpleasant for you. Okay, Shinji cringed back, wrinkling his nose. Just back off for a second and eat a breath mint. I'll give you the stupid statue already. There, was that so hard? The blond man straightened, smiling coldly, but he didn't step back. Smartest decision you've made all day, kid. I really don't want to have to bruise my knuckles on your snotty face. Now, hand over the statue. Fine, whatever, Shinji muttered, and held up the bag. Here, just take it. Big hands opening, the man reached for the bag. Shinji waited until his arm was completely outstretched, his fingers inches away from the plastic, before he darted forward, ducked beneath the man's elbow, and took off toward the center of the market. Hey! Pounding footsteps sounded behind him. Shinji didn't dare look back as he passed a booth selling beaded jewelry and veered sharply to the left, darting between the aisles. He flung himself into the crowd, using his smaller size to dart and weave around buyers and vendors. Ducking behind a fruit stand, he peeked through the crowd, searching for his pursuers. The 3 men had split up and were combing the market, angrily shoving their way past vendors and market-goers, but they seemed to have lost sight of him. Heart racing, Shinji drew back, melted into the crowd, and went looking for his aunt. He found her at one of the stalls, bent over and perusing a table of handcrafted leather wallets, belts, and purses. She had a couple of bags dangling from her arm. There you are, Aunt Yui smiled as he came up. That didn't take long. Her gaze fell to the plastic bag under his arm, and her eyes brightened. Oh, what's this? Was your quest successful, young knight? We have to go, Shinji said, and grabbed her by the sleeve. Now, we have to leave this place. What? What are you talking about? Hang on. Yui pulled her arm out of Shinji's grip, then placed both hands on his shoulders, looking down at him. Calm down, Shinji, she urged in a soothing voice. Take a deep breath. What happened? Some men are after me, Shinji began. They threatened me, and when I didn't give them what they wanted, they chased me through the market. Threatened you? Aunt Yui frowned. Did you antagonize them? She asked in an exasperated voice. I told you not to talk back to anyone while we were here. No, I didn't talk back to them. Not until they acted like jerks, anyway. Aunt Yui, listen! I bought something in a shop, a statue of some kind. These men followed me outside and tried to make me sell it to them. When I told them no, they chased me through the marketplace. Aunt Yui's frown deepened. They chased you? Shinji nodded, and Aunt Yui's lips thinned. For a second, he held his breath, wondering if she would believe him. He had been known to tell elaborate stories, ask misleading questions, and dance around the truth sometimes, but he had never openly lied to her. All right, she told him, let's get back to the boat. You can tell me everything that happened once we're there. He didn't see the men in the crowd as he and Yui wandered back through a Bengay market, Shinji silently telling his aunt to go faster. Chapter 2. The sun was hanging low over the Zambezi River, tinting the water red, as Shinji and his aunt made their way back to the Good Turn. That's the name of their boat. Everything seemed peaceful, but Shinji still couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Let's go a few minutes downriver before it gets too dark, Yui said as they climbed aboard the boat. Then you have my full attention. Yeah, Shinji muttered. Sounds good. The engine of the ancient trawler gurgled to life, and Yui deftly slid the vessel into the middle of the river. On the far side of the bank, the dark lump of a hippo raised its head from the water and watched them depart. Leaning against the railings, Shinji took the plastic bag in both hands, feeling the hard lump of the idol within. Lifting out the tissue-wrapped statue, he paused a moment, then peeled back the paper just enough to see the top of the idol's head. It looked very normal. A hand-carved statue, intricately designed, of course. The feathers on the serpent's wings were all individually carved, but normal all the same. There was no feeling of magic, no supernatural glow, no sensation of wonder or awe. Even the tiny green gems of its eyes seemed dull and without sparkle. Why would anyone want this? Shinji thought. It's just a carving of a snake with wings. Is it really that valuable? I don't see anything special about it. But if that was true, why couldn't he stop looking at it? Why did he almost feel connected to this thing? All right, Shinji, came Yui's voice from inside the cabin. I'm ready. Let's see this statue of yours, and you can tell me what happened in the marketplace, from the beginning. Shinji winced. Tucking the idol into the bag again, he pushed himself off the railing, ready to head into the cabin. But then, over the rumble of the engine and the slosh of water against the sides of the boat, he heard a new sound, a strange, high-pitched whine, faint but getting steadily louder. On his travels with Aunt Yui, he had seen and heard all manner of boat engines, from yachts to jet skis, but this time, this was a sound that he hadn't heard before. Puzzled, he walked to the back of the boat to gaze out over the river. The sun had dropped behind the tree line, plunging everything into shadow, and the waters were dark. But he still thought he could hear something, and now he was beginning to see something moving out on the rippling surface. Suddenly, a pair of spotlights flashed on, shining right into his eyes. Wincing, Shinji stumbled back a pace, shielding his eyes and squinting against the sudden brightness. He heard the whine of the engines and could just make out two low-slung vessels, black and nearly invisible against the river, speeding toward the rear of the turn. They were very fast, much faster than the turn, closing the distance as if the trawler were bobbing motionless in the middle of the river. Pirates! Shinji's heart gave a violent lurch. Being attacked by pirates out on the river was rare, but not unheard of. Shinji had heard stories of lonely vessels being set upon by marauders looking to loot and steal. He just never thought it could happen to Aunt Yui and him. Aunt Yui! He yelled, spinning around. Pirates! We're being attacked! The vessels pulled alongside the turn, and Shinji could see dark figures glaring up at him. He whirled and started to sprint toward the cabin when a pair of hands latched on to the edge of the turn, and a black-clad figure hauled itself over the edge, right into his path. The intruder wore a ski mask, so Shinji couldn't see his face, and he lunged at the boy with big, gloved hands. Shinji ducked, darting beneath the thick arms, and the man grunted in annoyance. Another black-clad figure heaved himself onto the deck, looking around for only a moment before spotting Shinji. Both men strode toward him, trying to trap him against the aft of the turn. Heart pounding, Shinji backed up until he was pressed against the rails, still clutching the bag that held the statue. Beyond the attackers, he glimpsed yet another pair climbing over the side of the ship and pushing their way into the cabin. A shriek echoed from inside, and worry for his aunt spiked when the two men cornering him lunged. Shinji dodged again, twisting away from one pair of arms, trying to duck beneath the second. Hands grabbed for him as he darted by, missing, but thick fingers snagged the plastic bag that held the idol. With a ripping sound, the bag tore apart. Hard in his throat, Shinji watched the idol fly in a lazy arc through the air before clattering against the side of the ship. Get the statue! Two pirates leaped for the idol. Shinji scrambled after it as well. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered if he shouldn't just let them have it. If pirates were willing to attack his vessel because of a statue, why not let them take the stupid thing? But the thought of losing the 𝑐𝑜𝑎𝑡�l made Shinji's stomach churn with anger. It was his. It had chosen him. He had to protect it. Snatching it up, he whirled to face the men who loomed over him. Their eyes were hard behind their masks, and one of them held out his large, gloved hand. Give us the statue, boy. Make this easy on yourself. Setting his jaw, Shinji held the statue tighter, backing up until he hit the railings again. Not so fast, he told them as they pressed forward. His stomach roiled in terror, but he faced his assailants with a firm, defiant grin. You guys didn't say the magic word. You little... One of the men grabbed for him, and he darted away, though he was running out of space to dodge. The man pressed forward, smiling coldly. I'm going to enjoy breaking your arms, you little brat. Shinji's legs shook. Beneath his fingers, the idol was growing warm. A pulse went through the figurine, then another, almost as if it had a heartbeat. Shinji felt his own heart flutter in response, matching the throb of the statue. His breath caught. Daring to look away from the pirates, he glanced down and saw that the statue's eyes were glowing, green like fireflies in the darkness. Another scream came from the cabin, followed by a crash. Shinji jerked his head up to see his aunt through the cabin window, fighting with a pair of masked men. Yui held a baseball bat and was swinging it at the heads of her attackers, who barely managed to dodge or duck. "Aunt Yui!" Shinji screamed. The idol in his hands flared, then exploded in a flash of golden light. Heat rushed through him, searing his veins, filling him with fire and warmth. He opened his eyes and, for a moment, saw the world through a different lens. Everything was brighter, colors sharp and vivid, like it was high noon, with the sun blazing overhead. He saw the pirates cringing back from him, their heads turned away and their arms in front of their eyes. Power filled him like sunlight, and gazing down at these small, short-lived mortals, Shinji felt a stab of both pity and anger. Then the light faded, the rush of power and strength going out like a snuffed candle. Shinji staggered, his vision going fuzzy as whatever power had been holding him up faded. He fell to his knees, only half aware of his surroundings, the men closing in around him. Something grabbed his arm, and angry, confused voices echoed in his ears. "Kid, where's the statue? What did you do with it?" Something shook him, harsh and desperate, but it barely registered. "Answer me!" A gasp echoed above him. "His arm, Kraus. Look at his arm." The man called Kraus made a muffled sound that might have been a curse. "Oh, we'll have to take the kid. We can't return to Frost empty-handed. Grab him and let's go." "What about the boat and the woman?" "Leave them. We can't do anything about it now. Move!" Chapter 3. He was standing at the edge of a cliff, gazing down on a vast, endless jungle. The breeze blowing across his skin was warm, smelling of dew and wet leaves. Below his feet, water cascaded over the edge of the rocks, falling into the pool of turquoise water far below. A flock of brilliant bluebirds with long tails soared over the treetops, filling the air with guttural cries. The canopy of trees seemed to go on forever, a deep green carpet stretching to the horizon. "Unspoiled by man," whispered a voice in his head, alien and yet somehow comforting. "There are still places in this world that have not known the touch of greed or destruction. But mankind's lust for power is infinite. It is up to us, to you, to ensure these natural places are not destroyed. You have become the guardian now, Shinji Takahashi." Shinji turned. A massive creature waited behind him, silhouetted against the sunlight. Its form was hazy and indistinct, as if he were looking at something through water. But Shinji thought he could make out an elegant sweeping neck, and a pair of enormous golden wings flared to either side. "Beware, young guardian," said the voice in his mind. "The Weaver is watching you." Shinji Takahashi was bored with his life. I think that's about to change. Our book today is called Shinji Takahashi and the Mark of the 𝑐𝑜𝑎𝑡�l by Julie Kagawa. This has been Chapter Book Storytime. Thanks for joining me today. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.